All right, the condition of many of Nigeria's correctional centers leaves a lot to be desired. Nigeria currently has over 74,000 inmates and is currently ranked the 27th country with the highest number of prisoners globally. According to World Prison Brief, inmates face many challenges like prison congestion, violence, poor infrastructure, limited educational and vocational training programs, and many others. In many cases, many of those housed in some of these centers are awaiting trial, a blight on the Nigerian justice system. Some non-governmental organizations are leading advocacy for reforms and have launched several initiatives that will help improve the quality of life for inmates. Well, joining us in the studio to shed more light on this is founder, Anchor Heritage Initiative, Bidemi Oladipupo. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you.
You have been engaged in the process of helping inmates, and all of it for quite some time now. Let's look at what a correctional center is like. Paint us a vivid picture of what you see when you engage these persons, when you go to these correctional centers.
Well, so basically, we're talking about the inmates itself now, or
the correctional center itself, the situation, the condition, everything.
Okay. So, yeah. Really, we've been in this space for like 6 years now.
Right.
And I will say what I met 2017 when we started this initiative, it's what we have presently now is much better than what we met in 2017. There are deliberate steps now to better things happening in the correctional centers there. If you won't mind, I'll just give a quick instance of the figures of the general population of the inmates that you just mentioned. As at 23rd of October, yes, the numbers stood at 81,550. But we have a waiting trial of like 56,000 as at October. Over the years that I've worked in this sector, I've seen the numbers roll between 71 to 73% of our waiting trial inmates. But right now we have maybe like a percentage of like 68. So we are practically getting much into the fact that this decongestion has to happen. Facilities like Ikoyi, like Kirikiri Medium, where we have new blocks coming up. So, it's not to say that the congestion is already taken care of. The prisons are still definitely congested. But what I'm trying to say is that we're moving towards something that really, at the end of the day, we should have a changed narrative.
Well, correctional facilities are actually meant to, we changed from using the word prisons to correctional centers. But then the question people will be asking is, what is correctional about them? Because the longer they stay there, the more they tend to also, experience what is called a recidivism.
Yes.
And it's just a concept, for you not being people who have the tendency to recommit the crime which they were incarcerated for in the first place. So the longer they stay, the more they tend to, go back to this, this criminal act. Do you see this, changing over time? Although you said, well, it has changed from what you meant in 2017, but it does appear like people will say, yeah, I will commit this crime. The worst I will experience is go to prison, and they'll release me at the end of the day, and I'll continue my lifestyle.
Well, so again, I would say the correctional service idea is gaining momentum. NGOs are working in this space. Churches are being deliberate in this space. And even the correctional facility itself, the NCOS, is also making practical steps. But most times, it's always like the public doesn't even have an idea of what is going on in this prison space. And that's why we just feel it's a complete dumping ground. For instance, now there are National Open University programs going on in the prisons. People can actually do their primary school learning, secondary school learning, university learning. There are programs like coding going on, you understand? So there are many initiatives that also go in. And at the end of the day, it behoves on the human being. Does he actually want to stay corrected or not? I mean, it's like someone that goes to church every Sunday. It doesn't mean he has given his life or he's actually a changed person.
Or transformed.
But the truth of the matter is you go into an average Kirikiri medium custodial center. Right. The inmates there that we see every week and we mingle with will tell me, sir, it is your choice. It is either you are ready to change or you are not ready to change. And that behoves on the human being. But Absolutely. Deliberate efforts are being made to make sure that they are corrected. And various initiatives are going on in the prisons, and some also powered by Anchor Heritage.
And that's where we'll come to you now. Anchor Heritage has been doing this for 6 years, like you mentioned earlier. Talk to us, what were the gaps Anchor Heritage saw that they decided to bridge, and how has that been going?
Okay, so actually the first gap we saw when we started this assignment was the fact that there are unjustly incarcerated people in the correctional centers, prisons then. There are unjustly incarcerated people, there are indigent people that couldn't afford the services of a lawyer. And that's why we actually started then. And as at date now, by the grace of God, we have a record of like 279 inmates that have been released by the organization so far. Part of what we now saw when we started the legal aid, because it made us relate with the inmates and have interaction with them. So we also understood that what will happen after they leave the prison. And that's what made us start our empowerment scheme. Our empowerment scheme was done in all the prisons in the Southwest and the North Central. North Central, I'm talking about Kwara, Kogi. And we were able to do that as a result because we know these inmates will come back into the society. When they come back into the society, like you talked about recidivism, what will they be doing? So we did a project of teach the inmates and beautify the prisons to, enable them to have skills, repaint the correctional centers, and we also likened it to a therapy for their minds. Deliberate therapy, we left them with souvenirs of a ruler. So they painted the prison walls, and that has been done in almost 17 correctional centers. So it gave them an idea that they could be better people if they are also deliberate with their actions when they regain freedom. Part of what we also saw is the gap in the welfare of inmates, welfare of staff, it's also very necessary because these are the people keeping the inmates. That's one service that I always wonder how they keep the inmates without weapons. Maybe those ones outside, So the welfare of inmates, we brought in some initiatives as well. We tried to work with organizations that partnered with us, especially during the COVID. Everybody forgot that someone will come into the court and meet a judge, and the judge will finally meet his family. So we were there making sure that they were well taken care of. So that is on the aspect of the welfare. We're talking about the welfare to inmates, welfare to staff. We are also trying to see a changed narrative of where the staffs will also be appreciated. Peradventure, maybe to the level of their other paramilitary establishments, so that they will be encouraged for that humane conditions that the NCS Act of 2019 specifically talked about. Another gap that we realized in the prison space is what brought about our aftercare initiative. Our aftercare initiative is also powered since 2019, and it's based on the fact that we know that when these people leave, they have two worlds to contend with. Yeah. It's either they're going to the real world or they're going back to that world of crime. But if we are not taking deliberate acts to make sure that that stigmatization is taken off them and they are given something to stand on, then we will lose them. And that's why we gave birth to the aftercare initiative of Anchor Heritage. And by God's grace, we have almost 49 ex-mates doing very well in various professions of what they've chosen to do now. And lastly, the gap we saw was the inflow of ages 21 to 35 in the correctional centers. It is worrisome.
Absolutely.
Very worrisome. Absolutely. And that gave birth to our last initiative that we just commissioned on the 29th of April in Kirikiri Medium. Many youngsters are going in, abandoning their career, abandoning their education. And so we were deliberate about that, and we launched the first IT hub in the Kirikiri Medium Custodial Center. It was commissioned by the Controller General of the Nigerian Correctional Service and represented by the Minister of the Interior then, Dr. Shuaib Gore was the PAMSEC. And they commissioned it. And the reason why we brought that IT hub into place is because of the youngsters. So they can continue their education, university programs, because the National Open University is there. We're presently working hand in hand with the National Open University to also see that that place is accredited. So they can learn different things, like we started the coding program in there in Kirikiri Custodial Center. We're teaching them various tech skills that will be good to engage their minds and their time in incarceration, taking them away from crime. And the second of the initiative we did of recent is the bakery initiative that we have in Agodi Custodial Center. Now, these initiatives I'm talking about, they're the first of its kind in the Nigerian correctional service space. The bakery is there, and the bakery idea was to make these inmates able to bake bread, sell the bread, and earn a living, according to the Section 14 of the Nigerian Correctional Service Act, subsection 1 to 5, that they can make a living while in incarceration. And so that is the idea of what we saw that made us come in with this initiative.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense, and I would like us to also demystify some of these, initiatives, some of the things that you've introduced to these prisons, because Nigeria Correctional Service Center is where because Nigeria also looks at cutting costs. Then the NCS has been seen to be one of the places where wastages occur. You talked about some of this training. I don't know how far it does go for all of the prisons, all of the correctional centers, facilities across the nation, because some people are made to learn tailoring, they're made to learn bakery, just like you mentioned, even coding, but their original interest is not taken care of. So much so that when they leave, they do not continue in that stride and they start to look for another means. So how do you marry the initiative you bring to them, vis-a-vis what they already have in mind, their own passion, their own interest, so as to cut wastages? And do these rather cut across the entire nation?
Well, sincerely, like I said earlier, except for that person that is actually not ready to change and take time to at least learn something while in incarceration. I give an average example of Kirikiri because it's almost like
very popular,
a
flagship place.
Yes. There is a workshop for learning shoemaking. There is farming at the back of the yard. There is kitchen practicing going on, how to cook. You can be involved there. There is education, like I said. Musical equipment, you can train on that. So, I mean, the face of the things that can be handy in there, if you don't find any of interest, then, I mean, you find out that some will just end up still wallowing in their past. Right. But for us, on our own initiatives, when we take initiatives like that to the prisons, to the correctional centers, we first check what's your level of interest. Do you know about this before? Like the baking. Were you baking before? Do you have interest in it? So it's not just everybody. So we have a sector of people that will indicate interest, and then we run with it. But for instance, like the chess initiative we took to the Bostal institution in Abeokuta, where the young offenders are, we didn't really need to ask who is interested, who is not interested. We just started the 100 days chess initiative, teaching them to engage their minds, especially because they are youngsters. So there are many things to hands-on if that person is ready.
Interesting.
But I'm not sure I can say this is nationwide practice like in other custodial centers. Lagos is the hub where things really happen.
But is your organization looking to expand to other parts of the country?
Oh, yes. Just like I said, we reached out to the Southwest, all the Southwest and the North Central. We're still working. Other organizations are working. So we're moving towards a chain narrative by deliberate steps.
Okay, so another aspect that I'd like for you to speak to is the matter of, because you mentioned welfare, their mental state. Is your initiative also looking at addressing that? Because you know what these things does to the minds of these people when they enter the prisons, they see a different world. Like you mentioned, it behoves on the individual to want to change, but then it still does something to their psyche even after they leave. It's just like a military personnel who goes into war. When he leaves that environment, there's something it does to their psyche. What is your initiative doing with regards to that, as well as also their persons, talking about their families? How are they also integrating them into all of this aspect of their lives?
Okay, for that, I talked about welfare. I didn't want to go into more details because of the time. Under our welfare package, we go into the prisons every fortnight with mental health experts. They go in for counseling sessions for those that need. We go in with pastors that are ready to volunteer to go in and talk to them, give them renewed hope. And that's our idea about the mental states. For those that have serious mental health issues, we pick on them because we are working directly in tangent with the welfare office of every correctional custodial center that we visit. So they highlight those people to us, and we have experts that are actually trying to nurture them out of that state. However, we also make deliberate efforts in our initiatives. So, for instance, like the IT hub we have in Kirikiri Medium Custodial Center, for an inmate to be qualified to use that place, he had to have shown interest. He has to have passed through the digital literacy course. That is like computer appreciation, how to use the computer and all that. And then when you enter into that space, it's a deliberate act of taking them completely away from the cells they are coming from. You will, when you enter into that space, it's a completely different world entirely. It's fully air-conditioned, workstations, well-lighted, computer systems, alternative power supply, backup. So we also try to use that as a therapy for them to take their minds off where they're coming from and into another world while learning. And that's the efforts we're making through for the mental state. And definitely, even the welfare office is also not lacking behind. They also have their own initiatives. I understand maybe like every church, they do checkups, and you can actually complain to the governor of the yard. That's the in charge of the yard. And then for states like, for every state command anyway, the controller also has scheduled visits when they come in, and they can listen to the inmates directly. But, you know, it's just to make more efforts, deliberate efforts, and like I said, also encourage every stakeholder, especially the staff, and I believe we will be getting a better result.
Absolutely.
Well, crimes like illegal drug deals are something said to be going on within the walls of the prisons. Some you mentioned youth, between 21 and 25, who are largely predominant prisoners now, so to speak, and then it continues to breed notorious criminals. Do you think there is need to privatize these facilities? Because we talked about privatizing security so that they can handle it very well. Do you see the need for these facilities to be privatized so that it's run entirely with by the private organizations and the government just play supervisory role?
Well, for that question, I will think maybe if we first start with a test running of the concurrent executive list that was approved, maybe before we go into privatization. Probably we can look into the state establishments. I feel it will also help to hasten the justice system, because it will hasten the awaiting trial inmates. Maybe it will make it faster. And most especially, I see what you're talking about, the privatization, but I think we should be more concerned about the fact of separation of crimes, separation of what brings an inmate into the custodial center. You understand? Right. So like a misdemeanor case of just ordinary stealing or raiding, he shouldn't actually end up in incarceration with an armed robber, where he uses 8 months awaiting trial, and at the end of the day gets influenced with someone who was actually with a gun. I think that is our major focus. So if it's privatization that will work for it, if it is moving from the executive into the concurrent list, I think we also need to make emphasis on that. Even though the new Act of 2019 already talks about the custodial and the non-custodial. That's right. But we also need to practice that more effectively so that we don't have a mix of a guy who actually doesn't know crime and then ends up in incarceration and learns crime.
So it's interesting. What more do you think government can do? Because there's so much in that act that you mentioned, 2019, that we are not seeing implemented. How do we begin to see this to improve our system, so to speak?
Well, I believe with the new administration of the vibrant Minister of Interior, presently resumed now, I believe we should look forward to better things in that department, and really, if we will make deliberate efforts in channeling much more strength towards this department, it will, at the eventual, give some results. So, looking at the present state of the correctional services now, the custodial centers, if we could, channel in some strength in probably, I always look at maybe like the sentenced inmates. The inmates that are already sentenced they are already called federal government property. Maybe we should start looking at maybe like health insurance schemes for them. It could also help, talking about maybe even retired officers. Maybe we can also, looking at the new drive of the minister to also even help with people that have fines he's running a campaign of like 4,000 inmates, all about the prison decongestion. And majorly, I would also like to state that the public can also help in this correction, program, in this Nigerian Correctional Service overhauling, because the public also have a part to play. Stigmatization is really a factor that is aiding recidivism. Stigmatization makes people leave the prisons and end up back because they don't find acceptance. But I think the public should also help judge less and give a benefit of doubt. That's this guy.
That has to start from the law, because when you go to prison, when you're convicted, there is a number of years you have to spend before you're able to run, for political office.
That's even for convicted. What of an awaiting trial inmate? They just call him a prisoner.
Well, the question I actually wanted to ask is, during the NSAS period, we saw a lot of prison breaks. And that's, really happened, and it felt like the entire country was going to crumble.
Afterwards.
That happened, more than 20 times between 2015 and, and now. We saw that in Bauchi, Shagamu, Ogun, Jos, Ondo, etc. So what are the factors that you feel are quite responsible for this? Because we know that the prison facilities are, quite regimented. They are overly regimented. The kind of food they are giving, the way they sleep, and all of that. So how do you think we can forestall something like this in the near future?
So for talking about prison breaks, I will want to mention that, in the eventual, if the people managing the inmates are well taken care of and encouraged, first, we already have staff encouragement, and that will also help to keep the calm. Secondly, we've noticed, if you would look at the track of this jailbreaks or whatever, it is at a point where there were on calmness in the society, especially like the NSAS period. Right. Opportunities were taken based on things happening in the society. So it's a general security issue that gave birth to those attempts, where some were foiled and some were actually broken through. And so we just need to also work on our internal security system, which I know has also improved because the military presence is even in some custodial centers as we speak now. And it's been heightened and been a while now. We're ahead of jailbreaks and all that. So that's right.
There's been talks about some rejection when inmates or some persons are taken to some custodial centers. They are rejected because the number is a lot. And right now we are not seeing that we are building new centers, so to speak. The number is still talking about the congestion and what we can do to resolve all of these issues that we're seeing, because crime is still going on in the society. If we are rejecting these persons, how do we address these issues at the end of the day?
Yeah, really crime is going on and is on the more. In the last 6 years, I think the total population I've always seen is in between 72 to 78,000, and now we are on 81,000. It's just that the awaiting trial has also reduced from the normal figures. Right. Crime is still going on, and rejection of inmates is part of that act you're talking about. It behoves and gives the officers the approval to reject when there is congestion. And I think since the act backs it up, it is a normal thing to do. And I believe that will also help the justice system to hasten up decisions and court judgments and discharge cases, while the service and the ministry also work around the congestion. And I'm sure that's part of what the minister is trying to do now, because crime is on the increase. We need to admit, but we need to let go. So if there is 4,000 across the states where we are looking at fines administration, if 4,000 go, we will definitely be able to do some more admission in the custodial centers. But right now, if there is a congestion, but there are also places they refer them to less congested centers. Yeah.
Okay. We have to leave the conversation here now. Our time is up. But we must thank you, Bidemi Oladipupo, founder, Anchor Heritage Initiative, for your time, and well done on what you do.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.